And just like that, we're at the halfway point of Dana White's Contender Series for 2025, as we are about to be talking about week 5 of the Contender Series. Very excited to drop this breakdown for you guys. Had a fun UFC Paris this past weekend. Yeah, just happy to get back into the role of things and break these fights down for you guys. I do want to give a quick shout out to everybody that kind of heeded my call in terms of hitting that subscribe button on this YouTube channel. If you have not already, my goal was to hit 10,000 subscribers before the ending of the season. And now halfway through the season, we got about 900 more subscribers to go, so that's a lot to ask. But if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. It would mean a lot in terms of being able to cross a milestone that I have for myself. It would, I believe the Contender Series ends about a week before my birthday. So it'd be a great birthday gift to myself to be able to have hustled to that 10,000 subscriber mark. So if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe. End of the year was kind of the initial goal, but Contender Series usually brings a lot of new traffic, and if you enjoy what you see, if I'm able to help you cash a few tickets as well, the least you guys can do is just hit that subscribe button. Clicking that button is free, is all I gotta say. All right. Let's do a quick week recap of week 4, as I normally do. Just giving my quick thoughts on some of the fights and the signees from the UFC. So let's get right into it. The first matchup up, would have won fight of the night on pretty much any card, as we had Tommy McMillan winning a majority decision against David McGoyan. Both undefeated fighters going up against the toughest test of their careers. And it seemed like McGoyan was going to get him out of there early, but only warranted 10-8s from one judge, as I think a lot of people would have given that a 10-8 to begin with, considering how badly he was beating up on McMillan. But it seems like McGoyan left the majority of himself in that first round, as he allowed McMillan to just outpoint him over the next 2 rounds and win that fight by decision. Good win for McMillan. He is way more of a dog than I was expecting him to be. I did have McGoyan in a parlay. Obviously, that did not come to fruition there. Both guys very talented, and I was hoping that Dana would have signed McGoyan as well, but I'm sure they'll keep an eye on him as a potential short notice spot to make it into the UFC. But good work from McMillan, way to bounce back and come back from the shit kicking that he was getting in the first round. It was very admirable. All right, the next one, we had Eduardo Chapolin going up against Antoine Ho. Henri coming in on super short notice. Ho, shout out to him for taking on any and all comers. Last season, he took on Lonnie Kavanaugh. Then it seemed like he was going to have somewhat of a favorable matchup against Frank Silva. Frank Silva pulls out, and in steps LFA flyweight champion Eduardo Chapolin. And Dana doesn't sign Chapolin. I think you got to give the guy some grace points for taking the fight on short notice the way that he did, and still go out there and, pretty much sweep Ho on the scorecards. So I was impressed with Henrique's performance. He went out there and did what he did, showcased an improved grappling game as well, which is something that bit him in the ass on The Ultimate Fighter. I thought he deserved the contract, but Dana does not give him the contract there. But we were able to cash a straight shot on him, so I'm very happy about that. Next up, Mandel Nalo going up against, sorry, I thought I just had something in my beard there. Maybe it's just my beard. Mandel Nalo pulling off the upset against Samuel Silva. Nalo, 36 years old, earns himself a contract after a just absolute beatdown of Cage Warriors champion Samuel Silva. Very impressive performance from Nalo. I knew he was good, but I really thought he was on a bit of a decline and that Silva would be able to get the better of him. I was wrong. I should have gone with the Canadian, and Nalo showcases that he still has a lot to give at this stage of his career. Then we had the Cezary Oleksiejczuk and Theo Hague fight. I took a small shot on Hague. I believe Oleksiejczuk was my official prediction, but I just felt the odds were a little bit too wide. But considering he went out there and dusted him in 36 seconds, maybe the odds should have been that wide, so I was off on that. But Hague is a guy I'm sure we'll definitely see again. He's going to learn from that. The guy is a very special grappler, and I think we'll see him improve and probably come back next season. But he is a guy I definitely need to still keep an eye on. But great work from Oleksiejczuk. I wish we got to see a little bit more out of him, but he's going to be a solid addition to the UFC roster. And then lastly, probably the knockout of the season thus far, Jean-Paul Labozniani goes out there and puts an absolute clinic on Jack Congdon, finishing him in 68 seconds. Beautifully timed jab and head kick, and then followed it up with like the mightiest of right hooks that you'll ever see as he ran into it, as he saw Congdon really struggling, and then obviously rocked after that big head kick that he ended up hitting. So very excited to see Lobozniani on the UFC roster. He is a better grappler than he is striker. So if anything from that we were able to take from that performance, this guy is definitely somebody to keep an eye on as he gets into the UFC. So all in all, I thought everybody that won deserved a contract. Even David McGoyan, even though he lost, I thought he deserved a contract as well. I think Ho should be a guy that the UFC keeps on their radar. Again, he was just given tough opposition and tough stylistic matchups on both of his Contender Series appearances. So hopefully he's not completely written off by the UFC. He is still a talented fighter that maybe would have won the guy that he was beat the guy that he was originally scheduled to fight. So maybe they put that on to a later episode of this season, but I think it'll be too short notice at this point. All right, let's get into the week 5 breakdowns. Some fun fights here. Should be some competitive matchups. A far stray from, I think it was week 2 or week 3, where we had, crazy big favorites going out there and dusting the damn thing. This should be a much more entertaining week with more competitive matchups. So let's start off in the women's strawweight division, as we have Chanel Dyer coming in at minus 180, going up against Carol Foro, who comes in at plus 155. Now, Dyer is a fighter that I've been keeping an eye on for about 2 years now, after she originally made her PFL Europe debut against Luisa Cifuentes, and she showcased a very solid striking performance that night, showcasing the Muay Thai background that she comes from. She's very good in the clinch, has some nasty elbows, loves the leg kicks, loves the head kicks as well. And we saw her take on her toughest opposition last time around against Valentina Skatizi. It ended up being a closer fight than a lot of people expected it to be, but Dyer still able to go out there and get that split decision victory to get her hand raised. At her best, she gets into a flow state from distance, picking her opponents apart, utilizing combinations, good footwork, good leg kicks, and good takedown defense as well to force opponents to stay in the upright position. Now, the majority of her training has come under the GBTT team, the Great Britain top team, headed by former UFC flyweight Brad Pickett. I believe flyweight or bantamweight, but either way, lower weight class Brad Pickett. If you guys have been watching UFC for a while, you know exactly who he is. One of the better coaches over there in the European scene. But it seems like Dyer has been jumping around to a lot of different training camps for this specific matchup. If you guys remember, this was actually the first matchup announced out of all the Contender Series fights, and this is in week 5. So she's had plenty of time to prepare for this matchup. She went over to the H2O gym in Montreal, which is mainly known for Olivier Aubin-Mercier. George St. Pierre actually ended up joining her for a day or two as well in that training camp. And then she went down to Vegas at Extreme Couture, where she's been training, like I said, at XC as well as the UFC PI. I'm assuming Brad Pickett and them will be in her corner once she actually steps foot in the cage on Tuesday, but that's what she's kind of been doing with her training. Now, Carol Forho is a fighter that I originally came across back in January of 2024 when she fought the one time she fought for the LFA, and she was actually brought in to do a job against Bia Consuli, who is one of those high-level prospects that the LFA has been investing a lot of time and money into, and little did they know that it was actually going to be a way more competitive matchup than they were originally expecting. Foro made it a lot more difficult for Consuli to establish top control and get her grappling going, and then on the feet, Foro was clearly the one with the striking advantage. Unfortunately, only one judge saw the damage for Foro, whereas the other 2 judges scored the grappling and control of Consuli, leading to Foro losing that fight by split decision. Since then, though, she's on a 6-fight winning streak, finishing all of those opponents, 5 of them in the first round, and then the last one in the second round, showcasing the big power that she really brings to the table. Now, there is a little bit of sketchiness to the level of competition she's been going up against. So if you have a solid enough striking game, of course you can look very dominant and very difficult for a lot of opponents to deal with. But this weekend will be this week actually will really tell us how good her striking is and if she can compete with somebody who also has a striking background. Before, like I said, she stalks her opponent a little bit flat-footed at times because she just stalks and is so heavy with the power that she throws. And her takedown defense has been relatively good throughout her career. But like I said, this Tuesday, we'll really see what she's made of as she goes up against a fellow striker here. Now, I was kind of surprised to see the line minus 180 for Dyer. I thought it'd be a little bit closer, but I think the big thing to take into consideration here, Dyer has fought her entire pro career at 125 pounds, and this fight will actually be taking place at 115, and she's saying she's been wanting to fight at this weight class forever, but there was a lack of opportunity on the European regional scene, not a lot of takers, more women fighting at 125 pounds. I don't even think that PFL Europe had a 115 pound division, hence why she often fought at 125 pounds. So she is long and lanky for the division already, and I think that's going to help her in this matchup, try to keep Foro at bay, utilizing her footwork, pivoting off of pocket exchanges, utilizing a straight jab and deep kick up the middle to stay away from that big power that Foro presents. I think Foro might be able to land some significant damage, and that could kind of really thwart some of the volume coming back her way from Dyer. I'm still going to go with Dyer to win this fight and probably on the scorecards, but I probably wouldn't go in on her unless she drops to about that minus 120, minus 130 range. Minus 180, somewhat fair, but Foro is somebody that we know that we shouldn't underestimate at all, especially the power that she brings to the table. But I think Dyer wins. I think she wins this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got the returning Chasen Blair looking to make good on his second opportunity on the Contender Series. He's going up against Samuel Sanches, who comes in at minus 130, and then obviously plus 110 on Chasen Blair. Now, let's start off with Blair, who had won a fight pretty dominantly. I'm trying to remember the name off the top of my head, but he beat somebody on the Cage Warrior scene and then was given a short notice opportunity on the Contender Series only about 2.5 weeks after that victory. And he took on a very tough Cody Steele, who was able to shut down Blair's wrestling game and then eventually just get to him on the strikes and eventually find that second round body shot finish. Blair took a little bit of time off, came back in April, and that's when he was able to dispose of a low-level opponent, got in on a body lock takedown, dragged him to the ground, and eventually got his back and sank in that rear naked choke. And that's Chasen Blair at his best. He normally looks to get his wrestling going, grind out opponents from that top position, or at least advance to positions where he can eventually find a finish. As we saw in the Cody Steele fight and a few fights prior, he is trying to build that confidence in his hands with his power and his combinations. But as we saw in the Cody Steele fight, and as I think we'll see in future fights, guys that have better striking than him will be able to thwart that, counter him effectively, and probably put him away. He is a solid prospect. He has the tools to be a very good UFC level of fighter, but I think he's still coming into the Contender Series as well as the UFC a little bit too early. Just as we saw when he went up against Cody Steele, he is behind it in terms of the striking realm, especially when he can get to his wrestling. And that's where I have my problems with him. He's a great athlete, a good wrestler, a good grappler, but that's what he really needs to rely on to try to get his victories. Now, he's going to have to try to implement that here against Brazilian Samuel Sanches, who comes in with a 10-1 record and also a stamp of approval from Jailton Almeida. If you guys remember from last year, Almeida shouted him out and even brought him on stage after he had defeated Derek Lewis for the post-fight press conference and said, hey, this is the guy to look out for. Sanches, his lone loss was by heel hook, I believe 3 years ago at this point, but he's on a solid winning streak since then, finishing a good chunk of his opponents as well. I believe he does a good job in terms of shutting down the takedowns from his opponents, really dictating the pace in the striking realm, good long rangy frame, good shots down the pipe, good kicks as well. Says he has a solid wrestling game, but I'd like to see that on display a little bit more. When he has been taken down recently, he does a good job in terms of working right back to his feet. And I think he's quite impressive. The last guy he beat finished him in less than 60 seconds, a 17-5 record, good fighter. The other tape that I was able to find from his, at least the second last tape I was able to find on this guy, he beat somebody that was 7-11. Now, on paper, you look at that and you're like, that's a scrub, right? But if you look into that guy's record, all that guy has fought is just high-level prospects, like Ibragimov, and even fought Owen Owensworth, I believe, from Cage Warriors. Solid prospects, and he's given them tough tests. So the fact that Sanches had to go to the decision to beat a guy like that, it should not be looked down upon in a bad way. That was a fun fight. Sanches was winning pretty much the entire fight there and shutting down the grappling game of that opponent as well. Now, in this matchup, Going into it, I really expected to just go ham on Sanches. I don't think that highly of Blair when he's fighting guys of this level. I think Sanches is the better striker. I think his speed and agility will help him counter Blair on the feet. But then it comes down to the wrestling. This might be one of the better wrestlers and grapplers that Sanches has gone up against recently. But I am impressed with what I've been seeing as of late from Sanches with his takedown defense and his get-ups. And if he can really thwart those first couple of attempts from Blair, I think he's going to give Blair hell on the feet. I think he torches him on the feet. I think he does very well. Blair might get a little bit overconfident if he lands a big shot or two, and that's going to end up leading to him walking onto a counter and getting knocked out himself. So I lean Sanches here. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better overall mixed martial artist, and I think he's more ready for this opportunity than Blair is. The total is currently set at 1.5, with I believe the over and under being at -110. But if you can find an alternate over under for 2.5, I'd like to see the under at anything better than -150, because I'd be happy to take a shot on that there. Either Sanches gets that knockout over Blair within 2 rounds, or maybe that means that Blair is able to get his takedowns and he could have some success on the ground, maybe even finding a submission. So I think there will be violence in this matchup. I think there will be a finish, but I'm going to go with Sanches to end up getting the win here, and I think he ends up knocking out Jason Blair. All right, next up, we got Franco coming in at -315, going up against Vidal, who comes in at +265. Now, Franco is one of the better prospects that I've seen coming into this season's Contender Series. I had never heard of him until I did the research on him here, and I'm very glad that I did, because he is very, very impressive. I believe he's 8-0 as a pro. 7 of those 8 wins, unfortunately, have come against guys with no wins, so that is a little bit of a red flag. But seeing his athleticism, seeing his BJJ black belt in progress, in action, his power striking as well, his ability to stay calm in bad positions and work out of those spots and then eventually get to his own offense is very impressive. This is a guy that I think has a high ceiling. He has the athleticism, he has the frame, he has the skill set, especially with the BJJ game, that he can be very dangerous against a lot of opponents, and I completely understand why he is a big favorite in this matchup. Like I said, he's a BJJ black belt, but also has a judo brown belt, which helps him get those throws and those takedowns so that he can implement that BJJ game as well. He's going up against Vidal, who is I think the 3rd or 4th different opponent that Franco has gotten now. Vidal is a guy that I originally researched when he made his pro debut at LFA 194 back in October. And even though the fight wasn't shown on the LFA broadcast, I was actually there live. So I got to see that fight firsthand, and it was just him utilizing his wrestling to thwart his opponent. Didn't really face much resistance, but didn't really show much aggression in terms of seeking a finish. But I believe out of all of his fights, where he went 5-0 as an amateur and 3-0 as a pro, this is the only fight that I believe went to the scorecards. All the other opponents he's been able to finish. His last 2 wins, first round TKO finishes, likely from getting his opponents to the ground and landing big shots from that top position. For a guy of his frame, he scrambles well, he moves well, has some good takedowns, but we have no idea what his striking looks like, because he gets to the takedown game immediately, and sometimes he's a little bit too desperate for it, which will definitely get him in trouble against guys that can thwart those takedowns, or maybe even threaten with submissions to try to scare him off of looking for double legs or single legs. I think there's a reason Franco is a big favorite in this matchup. I think he'll be able to thwart the wrestling of Vidal. I think he'll be able to get his own judo going. I think he'll be able to get to his submission game. And I think he makes short work of Vidal, probably finishing him in a round and a half. I think that's why the under 1.5 currently sits at -235. It makes sense. I think Franco will be able to out-muscle Vidal, put him in bad spots, and eventually find that submission. Yeah, don't need to go too much deeper into this one. I feel really good about Franco, and I think he does this or gets the win here with relative ease. All right. Next up, we got the returning Teague coming in at +375, going up against LFA champion Lorian Douglas, who comes in at -500. Now, we'll start off on the Teague side of things. So when he first made his Contender Series appearance, it was September of 2024, and he came up short against Kevin Vallejos, who was coming into his second opportunity on the Contender Series. Now, we know Vallejos has a ton of power in his shots, a ton of power in his hands, and he was really able to just walk down Cam Teague, land those big shots. And even though he landed his biggest strikes on Teague, Teague never went out. He dropped, but he was still in the fight, and the referee just gave him a mercy stoppage at that point. But Teague has really good durability for a fighter of his style. He likes to utilize a lot of forward pressure, a lot of output, a lot of volume. He has a stinging jab down the pipe. Not the most athletic guy, but a guy that is going to keep a high pace and a high volume, and that's how he normally wears down his opponents and eventually gets them out of there. He does have a win over former UFC fighter Austin Lingo, showcasing that similar style of just walking him down, landing his big shots, peppering him, continue to stay on the gas, and eventually getting him out of there. And I think that's the best part of his game. If he can withstand the shit kicking that normally comes his way from these types of heavy punches that he often faces, he's usually able to start wearing down on them and using like kind of the Homer Simpson approach in a sense, but a little bit more educated with good volume, good footwork, good forward pressure, keeping his opponents on their back foot, and then punishing them whenever he finds those openings to let go with his strikes. Takedown defense is on point. His own offensive grappling, not that bad either, but he truly prefers walking his opponents down and landing those big shots and in big volume as well. Now he's going up against Lorian Douglas, who's had a serious career resurgence. He was on a 1-2 run after that last loss that he suffered at the hands of Isaac Thompson in August of 2023. And since then, he's on a 4-fight winning streak. I believe he's finished all 4 of those opponents, and that included winning the interim LFA title after he finished Javier Reyes, who's also getting a Contender Series shot in the next few weeks, and then unifying the title against Elijah Johns by knocking him out in the second round back in January. It was very impressive to see him make this resurgence after being a guy that I thought was just going to kind of just be a middling LFA fighter and not really make it to the next level. Maybe like a Rafael Donasa type of fighter, but I don't know if that's when he joined the Bloodlines team, which has guys like Cub Swanson, Danny Silva, LFA champion Richie Miranda. I don't know if it's when he joined those guys, but he's really turned it up a notch here. He's a very nasty striker, good kicks, nasty combinations, fast, powerful strikes. I'm a little bit skeptical in terms of like how often he lets go with his strikes. He's a little bit of a tepid-paced kickboxer, but when he does go, he makes sure that it counts. He makes sure he lands with emphasis that opponents have to respect the power that's coming back their way. Opponents who have had success against him in the past often look to take him to the ground and smother him there, but it's clear he's been working on the defense to keep fights in the upright position where he often ends up having a bit of an advantage over his opponents. Now, again, Douglas has looked amazing over the last couple of fights, finishing all the guys that he has. He has a good strength of schedule as well, and obviously that's an advantage he has in this matchup against Teague. The other advantages are his speed, his stinging power, his kicks as well. And that could definitely get him the win here, which is ultimately going to be my prediction, but I think if he wins, it probably comes by decision. I know he's finished his last couple of opponents, but Teague is a difficult guy to put away. I know Kevin Vallejos got him out of there, but it took a lot of firepower from Vallejos to force that stoppage from the referee. I think Teague may have learned from that. I think he'll be able to put up a good enough fight here against Douglas, and I think he can stretch this to the scorecards, maybe even get a finish of his own if he can stretch Douglas into the latter half of this fight. Teague's durability should help him here, and then his constant pressure, constant jab, staying on the gas with Douglas could definitely pay off for him as Douglas potentially starts to slow down later on in this matchup. I saw, plus 375 is the number that I'm using for this breakdown because that's what's currently on Bet Online. But on Pinnacle, I saw plus 449. That is absolutely crazy. Say what you want about Cam Teague. The guy is not that bad that Douglas deserves to be a minus 700 favorite. So if you see that kind of number, even plus 375 makes me a little bit sketched. I think that's a spot that's worthy of a little bit of a shot if Douglas is unable to get that early finish. There are those spots throughout this season and even the recent fights where we've taken those big underdog shots and they may not have paid off, but they look better than the odds indicate, and it's just a matter of time before those spots end up hitting, and this could be one of those. So My prediction is going to be Ryan Douglas. I think the speed, stinging power, the kicks, the thudding shots that he ends up landing, that's probably going to get him the decision here. But Cam Teague will be a game opponent, and he'll make it very difficult for the minus 500 to come through. Do not parlay the minus 500. I beg you, do not parlay the minus 500. I'd rather take a little bit of a shot and possibly take an L on Teague than end up parlaying Douglas and end up having to rip up that ticket. So prediction, Douglas. If I were to bet it, I'd probably take a little bit of a shot on Cam Teague. All right. That brings us to the heavyweight main event, which I believe was put together on short notice here, where we have CFFC champion Anthony Guarascio coming in at minus 205, going up against Stephen Asplund, who comes in at plus 175. Now, Guarascio's tape has been hilarious to watch from his amateur days where he had his first amateur fight in late 2012 as a gangly light heavyweight. He went 0-1, had one no contest in that because he suffered a groin strike that he couldn't recover from, so that fight went to a no contest. After that, he took 8 years away from action and ended up losing again, but then since August of 2022, he finished his amateur career on a 2-fight winning streak and then has turned pro and gone 3-0 as a pro, but most recently picked up a big win over Bailey Schoenfelder for the CFFC title, knocking him out and earning him that prestigious regional title. Guarascio is like the quintessential slugger Cinderella story in a sense, right? The guy fights out of his garage, literally. Like even during the broadcast for his last fight, you know, when the announcer's announcing where they're fighting out from, he said he fights from independent, meaning he trains himself. But he just has big power. The guy looks like he's on some solid roids. Like if you look at him compared to early in his career, it's clear this guy's on something, right? It kind of gives me that Alvin Hines kind of thing that we saw when Hines was fighting in the LFA. It's hilarious. This guy just looks stacked, and I think that will potentially cause him a drug test failure, which I think he may have already had in his pro career. I could be wrong on this. He technically has 4 wins, but one of those wins was overturned to a no contest because there was some sort of violation that he had that the commission got onto, and then they eventually overturned that win to a no contest. So that's something to keep an eye on to begin with. Big power puncher. The guy's only had like 3.5 minutes of total cage time through his pro career, including that no contest that he went to. There's no telling what his takedown or at least defensive grappling game looks like. Bailey Schoenfelder should have shown that off already, but he was on the back foot from the jump and he just couldn't get in on a takedown attempt. So credit Guarascio from scaring him off, from not even being able to attempt a takedown. But we have no idea what his takedown or at least defensive grappling looks like. We have no idea what his gas tank looks like if he can't get his opponents out of there early. Yet he's minus 205 here against a guy in Stephen Asplund, who I'm not a big Stephen Asplund guy either, right? Let's get into him here before I actually get the official prediction part of this breakdown out. Asplund was able to get a winning streak going back in April. He had his first loss in his mixed martial arts career. You're talking about a guy that went 6-0 as an amateur and then was on a 3-fight winning streak until he went up against Denzel Freeman. And then Freeman, one of the most underrated guys on the regional scene, but I will say it really seems like his heart is not in the mixed martial arts game. The guy is a high-level wrestler, has a crazy good, or at least relatively good striking game compared to the rest of the regional heavyweights on the scene. Good smothering top pressure. I was very happy to cash a big ticket on him against Asplund that night. Got the back, choke Asplund out. But even in Asplund's last fight, he's pulled off 2 straight wins now. The first of those wins was against Hammer Morton. Bit of a slugfest, showed off his chin, was able to wear out Hammer Morton, and then eventually get the 3rd round stoppage there. And then last time around, we saw the holes in his grappling game. He got taken down immediately by Raiden Kovacs, got absolutely pummeled, probably a 10-8 round if we're being honest. And then obviously Kovacs empties his gas tank, and then in the 2nd round, Asplund was able to take advantage of that and eventually get him out of there pretty quickly. So there are holes in Asplund's game, but from a technical standpoint and from an overall MMA standpoint, I think he's better than Guarascio. Guarascio just has big power. If Asplund can roll with the shots, I think he's the slicker boxer without a doubt. He throws in better combinations. He has the better, or should seemingly have the better gas tank, and has at least a process-worthy grappling game to a certain extent, that he could stretch Guarascio here and put Guarascio in positions he has yet to be in his pro career. And that's where we see Guarascio probably start to slow down. So, again, I'm not a big Asplund guy, and I was actually going to pick against him in the matchup that he had coming up here against Jordan Heiderman for the LFA. Obviously, he gets pulled from that to get into this short notice opportunity. But like stylistically speaking, this is a winnable fight for him. He's the better all-around mixed martial artist. He's not just training out of fucking independent. You know what I mean? He's not training out of his garage. He's training with some decent guys. Thomas Peterson was one of his training partners as well. There's a couple other big guys. I believe Alvin Hines was one of his training partners, if I'm not mistaken, those Minnesota boys. So I'm going to go with Asplund here. I hate to say it, but I like betting against heavy favorites that are just known for those early finishes. And even then, Guarascio is just, he clips these guys and they go down. But Asplund, historically speaking, has a good chin, has good boxing, should have a good enough defense game. He should be able to stretch Guarascio here and eventually get him out of there in the second or third round. So, yeah, give me Asplund by second or third round TKO or even submission. There you guys go. Week 5 breakdowns. Going a little bit longer here than I wanted to for this breakdown, but I feel very passionate about some of these spots. So we'll see how they end up coming through on Tuesday. I've already dropped 3 plays on the Lock of the Night Patreon page for this card. If you weren't able to decipher it from this breakdown, check out the Patreon page and you guys can get access to it there. And then I'll be back tomorrow to drop the UFC or Noche UFC breakdowns. I've already gone through about 40% of that card. I'll get to the rest of it over the next 24 hours and then drop that breakdown for you guys as well. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.